It all started with a row of perfectly trimmed evergreen hedges. And if you'd asked me that morning whether a few bushes could turn an entire neighborhood upside down, I probably would have laughed and told you to stop watching so many crime shows. Looking back now, I wish I'd laughed a little less. My name's Ethan Calloway, and until last spring, Maple Ridge Estates in western Ohio was exactly the kind of place people moved to when they were tired of surprises. Quiet streets, kids riding bikes after dinner, retirees arguing over whose tomatoes tasted better, the occasional HOA email reminding someone to hide their trash cans. Nothing exciting ever happened there. Then one Wednesday morning, I stepped onto my back deck with a cup of coffee, expecting to hear birds and lawn sprinklers, but instead the first thing that hit me was the smell. Wet dirt, fresh mulch, and underneath it, something sharp, almost like diesel mixed with fresh asphalt. I looked toward the back of my yard and nearly spilled my coffee. Overnight, an 8-foot wall of emerald green hedges had appeared behind every single house on our street. Perfectly straight, perfectly trimmed, still sparkling with dew as if they'd been planted by some landscaping crew that never slept. At 7:12 that morning, my phone buzzed with an HOA email from President Linda Grayson. According to her, the new landscaping project was meant to increase homeowner privacy while enhancing long-term property values. The neighborhood Facebook page lit up almost immediately. People loved it. Finally, some privacy, one woman wrote. Best decision this board has ever made, another neighbor replied. I even clicked the thumbs up reaction before setting my phone down. Honestly, I wanted to believe it too. Linda wasn't exactly warm, but she'd always carried herself like someone who knew what she was doing. Still, something felt off. Maybe it was that strange chemical smell hanging in the air, or maybe it was because nobody had ever mentioned a project that big during any HOA meeting. I let it go for a couple of days, convincing myself I was just being skeptical. Then, every morning right after sunrise, I started hearing engines. Not cars, not delivery vans. These were heavy diesel engines, the kind that growled low enough to make the windows vibrate if they got close. At first, the sound was faint, muffled behind those thick hedges. Then it became impossible to ignore. Every morning, same time, same rhythm, trucks shifting gears, backup alarms beeping somewhere beyond the wall of green. I asked my wife, Sarah, if she heard them too. She shrugged and said there was probably construction somewhere across town. My next-door neighbor, Greg Morales, wasn't so convinced. On the fourth morning, he walked into my driveway carrying an old aluminum ladder over one shoulder. Tell me I'm not losing my mind, he said, because if those are garbage trucks, they're the biggest garbage trucks I've ever heard. I laughed, but it was the uneasy kind. We carried the ladder behind my fence, leaned it carefully against the new hedge, and Greg climbed first. He barely reached the top before his entire body froze. He didn't say anything for nearly 10 seconds. Then he looked down at me with this expression I'd never seen on his face before. Ethan, he said quietly, you need to see this. I climbed up beside him, and the second my eyes cleared the top of those hedges, my stomach dropped. Behind what every homeowner believed was a simple privacy barrier sat a brand new gravel road, wide enough for 2 dump trucks to pass each other, stretching across the back of our neighborhood like it had always been there. Fresh, crushed limestone reflected the morning sun while massive yellow loaders rolled back and forth. A white dump truck thundered past beneath us, throwing clouds of gray dust into the air. The driver never even looked up. He acted like our neighborhood didn't exist. Greg whispered, "How long has that been there?" I shook my head because I honestly didn't know. It couldn't have taken just one night to build something like that, could it? That evening, instead of watching baseball like I usually did, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, searching city planning records. I figured maybe I'd missed a notice or overlooked some public hearing. After almost an hour, I found it. A development permit approved 3 months earlier under the name Reach Horizon Development LLC. 32 acres of commercial retail space, restaurants, medical offices, a grocery store, and buried halfway through the site access documents was a map showing temporary construction traffic entering from the exact edge of Maple Ridge Estates. I zoomed in 3 different times because I couldn't believe what I was looking at. The road behind our homes wasn't temporary access from somewhere else. It connected directly to the land hidden behind those brand new hedges. My chest tightened. Those bushes weren't planted to give us privacy. They were planted to make sure we couldn't see what was happening behind them. I printed every page before going to bed, highlighted the site map in bright yellow, and told Sarah, either I'm reading this completely wrong, or somebody just turned our backyard into the front entrance of a construction site. She looked at me for a long moment before quietly asking, "Do you think the HOA knew?" I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew the only question that mattered wasn't whether they knew. It was how long they'd been helping to hide it. If you're ready for the next chapter, type Part 2, and we'll find out what happened when I walked into that HOA meeting carrying a folder full of evidence. The next evening, I walked into the Maple Ridge Clubhouse carrying a plain manila folder that suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Normally, those HOA meetings were painfully predictable. Somebody complained about weeds, somebody else argued over mailbox paint colors. Linda Grayson smiled politely. Everyone voted on something nobody really cared about, and we all went home before 8. That night felt different before anyone even sat down. Greg caught my eye from across the room and gave me a nervous nod. My wife squeezed my hand before taking a seat in the back, whispering, "Just stay calm." I promised I would, although my heart was pounding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. Linda opened the meeting with her usual practiced smile. "Before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone for the wonderful feedback regarding our new privacy landscaping." A few people clapped. Several nodded approvingly. Then she asked if anyone had new business. I stood up. "Actually, I do." The room went quiet. I walked to the front, laid the folder on the table, and slid a highlighted site map toward Linda. "Could you explain why our new privacy hedge is hiding a commercial construction road?" Her smile didn't disappear, but it definitely stiffened. She glanced down at the papers for barely 2 seconds before sliding them back toward me. "Mr. Calloway, construction outside the community falls beyond HOA authority." "Except it isn't outside the community," I answered. "The access road connects directly behind our homes." She folded her hands together. "Again, that's a matter for the developer and the city." I leaned forward. "Then why did the hedge go up the same night the truck started using that road?" You could almost feel the air leave the room. One board member shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while another suddenly became fascinated with his notepad. Linda finally looked me in the eyes. "Correlation doesn't prove wrongdoing." Greg stood up before I could answer. "Then why didn't anyone tell us about the trucks?" Linda sighed dramatically. "Because there was nothing requiring notification." Murmurs started spreading across the room. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived there almost 20 years, raised her hand. "Wait, are trucks really driving behind all our houses every morning?" Another neighbor chimed in. "My windows have been shaking all week." A retired firefighter named Dawn spoke from the back. "Mine too. I thought it was an earthquake." Linda tried to regain control. "Everyone please. Speculation helps no one." I picked up another document. "This isn't speculation." I held up the approved permit. "This project was filed months ago." Someone asked the question I'd been hoping somebody besides me would finally say out loud. "Did the board know?" Linda paused just a little too long before answering. "We were informed of landscaping improvements." That wasn't an answer. Everyone knew it. The meeting dissolved into overlapping conversations until Linda abruptly adjourned early, claiming the discussion had become unproductive. As people filed out, several neighbors stopped me in the parking lot asking for copies of the permit. Others still insisted I was making too much out of normal construction. One guy even laughed and said, "They're building stores, not a prison." I smiled politely, but something about Linda's reaction kept replaying in my head. She hadn't looked surprised. She'd looked irritated that someone had connected the dots. That feeling followed me home. Over the next week, I became obsessed. Every night after work, I dug through county property archives, engineering plats, Survey records. Anything I could legally access online. Sarah joked that she was becoming a widow to my laptop, but underneath the joke, I could hear the concern in her voice. "You're sleeping 4 hours a night," she said one evening as she placed dinner beside me. "Maybe let this go." I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard those diesel engines rumbling behind our fence. Then, 3 nights later, I found something that made every lost hour worth it. The subdivision plat recorded in 1999 didn't match the new engineering survey attached to the retail project. At first, I thought I was comparing the wrong lots. But after printing both maps and laying them side by side across the dining room table, the discrepancy jumped out almost immediately. The property line had shifted, not by inches, by nearly 15 feet. 15 feet may not sound like much until you realize that's the width of a driveway. I checked the legal descriptions again. Same parcel numbers, same neighboring tracts, different boundary. I called Greg over. He stared at the maps for nearly 5 minutes before saying, "Either one of these surveys is wrong, or somebody moved the line on paper." That sentence sent a chill through me. The next morning, I hired an independent surveyor named Harold Whitman, an old guy with 40 years of experience and absolutely no patience for politics. Harold spent nearly 6 hours walking the rear easement with GPS equipment and faded boundary markers most of us never knew existed. Around sunset, he waved me over. "See this iron pin?" he asked. I nodded. "It's original. Been here decades." He pointed toward the gravel road. "That road crosses beyond where the developer claims the line sits." "By how much?" I asked. He looked at his notes. "About 14.5 feet. I felt my stomach tighten. "You're certain?" Harold gave me a look that almost sounded offended. "Son, I made my living being certain. Now I had proof. Real proof. Not suspicion, not theories, measurements." The following Monday, I filed a formal zoning complaint with the county planning office, attaching Harold's survey, copies of both plats, aerial photos, permit records, and a timeline showing exactly when the hedge appeared and when construction traffic began. Then I did something Sarah initially thought was crazy. I called Channel 8 News. I figured they'd ignore me. Instead, a producer called back within 3 hours. Apparently, giant construction trucks secretly operating behind suburban homes made for pretty compelling television. 2 days later, reporter Melissa Crane stood in my backyard with a cameraman while dump trucks thundered behind the hedge every few minutes. "Walk me through what you discovered," she said as the camera rolled. I spread both surveys across a folding table. "This is the original property line." I tapped the older plat. "This is the one submitted with the development application." I tapped the second. "They're not the same." Melissa looked genuinely surprised. "You're saying this road shouldn't be where it is?" "I'm saying somebody benefited from pretending the boundary moved." Right on cue, another fully loaded dump truck barreled down the gravel road behind us, rattling the fence hard enough that Melissa actually turned around mid-interview. The cameraman zoomed through a gap in the branches, catching the truck passing behind a large sign that read, "Private Residential Property." It was one of those moments you couldn't script if you tried. That story aired on a 6 o'clock news the same evening. By sunrise the next morning, our quiet little subdivision looked like a movie set. County inspectors, engineering vehicles, police cruisers controlling traffic, utility representatives, even lawyers wearing reflective safety vests was standing behind the hedge measuring everything in sight. Linda Grayson drove slowly past my house around 9 that morning. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stared straight ahead, with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles looked white. Around lunchtime, Greg texted me 3 words that made every sleepless night worthwhile. "They're shutting it." I hurried outside just in time to watch crews place massive concrete barriers across the gravel entrance while frustrated truck drivers turned around one after another. For the first time in weeks, the engine stopped. The silence felt almost unreal. But as satisfying as that moment was, I had no idea the biggest revelation was still waiting just around the corner, because the city wasn't finished asking who approved the hedge, and someone was about to start pointing fingers. Watching those concrete barriers slide into place should have felt like the ending. The kind where the good guys win, the bad guys disappear, and everybody goes back to mowing their lawns like nothing ever happened. Real life doesn't work that way. About an hour after the road was officially closed, county investigators walked into the HOA clubhouse carrying boxes of documents. And before sunset, rumors were already flying through the neighborhood faster than they ever had on Facebook. One person claimed the board had been tricked by the developer. Someone else insisted the city had approved everything legally. Another neighbor swore Linda Grayson had signed confidential agreements months earlier. Nobody seemed to know the whole truth. But one thing was obvious. Somebody had made decisions they never expected homeowners to question. A week later, the county held a public hearing. And for the first time since this whole mess started, every chair in the room was filled. I sat beside Sarah while Greg leaned against the back wall with his arms crossed. Linda arrived with an attorney and barely acknowledged anyone. When the lead investigator presented his findings, the room became so quiet you could hear papers turning. The temporary construction access itself wasn't the biggest issue. The real problem was that the revised survey submitted with the development application didn't accurately match the recorded subdivision boundary. And because of that error, construction activity had extended into an area that required additional approvals and homeowner notification that never happened. The investigator never accused Linda of creating the discrepancy, but he did confirm that the HOA board had received advance notice about the landscaping project and never questioned why an 8-foot hedge suddenly needed to block the view behind every backyard. That single statement changed everything. Several homeowners who had defended the board from day one slowly lowered their heads. Mrs. Patterson quietly whispered, "So they really did know something." Linda finally stood to speak. Her voice sounded nothing like the confident woman who had run every HOA meeting I'd ever attended. She insisted she believed the landscaping was only intended to reduce noise and improve privacy during nearby construction, that she trusted the information provided by the developer, and that she never imagined homeowners were being kept in the dark. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she wasn't. Even now, I honestly can't say with certainty what she knew or when she knew it. What I do know is that leadership comes with responsibility. And when people stop asking difficult questions because the paperwork looks official, everyone else pays the price. Within another month, the developer announced a completely redesigned construction route entering from a state highway nearly 2 miles away. The gravel road behind our homes was removed, the damaged ground was restored, and most of the hedge came out with it. Funny enough, nobody complained when those bushes disappeared. We'd all learned that sometimes the prettiest thing in the neighborhood can also be the thing hiding the biggest problem. Linda resigned before the next HOA election, and 3 other board members chose not to run again. No dramatic handcuffs, no courtroom confession, just quiet resignations and uncomfortable silence. Life eventually settled back into something that looked familiar. Kids started riding bikes again. Summer cookouts returned. The mornings became peaceful enough that I could actually hear birds instead of diesel engines. Every now and then, Greg still walks over with 2 cups of coffee, and we'll stand at the back fence, looking across the open field where that hidden road used to be. It's hard to believe something so disruptive was once only a few yards away, completely hidden behind a wall of perfect greenery. The strange part is, this whole experience didn't leave me angry nearly as much as it left me paying closer attention. I read notices now. I attend meetings I used to skip. I ask questions even when everyone else seems satisfied with easy answers. Because I've learned that communities don't usually fall apart because of one enormous lie. More often, they drift into trouble because hundreds of decent people assume someone else already checked the details. And maybe that's the lesson I'll carry longer than anything else. If I'd ignored those truck engines like everyone expected me to, if Greg hadn't climbed that ladder, if Sarah hadn't encouraged me to keep digging even when I doubted myself, that road might have stayed there for months, maybe years. So now I'd really like to hear what you think. Was the HOA simply careless? Or do you believe the board knowingly helped hide what was happening behind those hedges? Was the developer the only one at fault? Or should community leaders be held just as accountable when they choose not to ask hard questions? Drop your opinion in the comments because I genuinely want to know where you stand. And if you've ever lived through an HOA dispute, a property conflict, or watched someone abuse a little bit of authority, share your story too. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more real neighborhood stories, and I'll see you in the next one.